Internationally acclaimed star of stage, screen, and television, your Paris date, Shirley, now your husband of 15 years, Jack Cassidy.
He was the world's teen idol, your perfect TV son. But behind the cameras lay addiction, denial, and a real-life stepmother haunted by her failure to save him. Watch as Shirley Jones finally reveals the heartbreaking truth about David Cassidy, and why even a mother's love couldn't pull him back. David Cassidy's story with Shirley Jones didn't start on the soundstage. It began in their own home. Shirley had married Jack Cassidy, David's father, which made her his stepmother before she ever played his mom on television. Imagine that. A boy suddenly gaining a stepmom who just happened to be one of Hollywood's most admired actresses. Their connection was complicated right from the start. David was still wrestling with the fallout of his parents' fractured marriage, and Shirley was walking into a family with wounds she hadn't caused, but couldn't ignore. By the time the Partridge Family came along in 1970, David was only 19. He was still unproven, still searching for his place. Shirley, already an Oscar-winning actress, had the power to influence casting. And here's the twist. David wasn't originally supposed to be in the show. Producers doubted he had the charisma, the look, or the talent to carry such a major role. It was Shirley who fought to have him tested, quietly suggesting he might be worth a second glance. That gamble turned into lightning in a bottle, making David the face of the teen idol craze almost overnight. But beneath the cheerful songs and matching costumes, tension was bubbling. Shirley wasn't just playing his TV mother, she was his real stepmother, which blurred every line between home and work. To the world, they looked like the perfect family. Behind the scenes, David was battling to carve out his own identity, terrified of living in his famous father's shadow. Shirley saw it all. She recognized the fire, the insecurity, and the hunger in David that mirrored Jack's own struggles. What most people never realized is how lonely David felt during those early years. While millions of girls were plastering his posters on their walls, David would later admit he felt isolated and misunderstood, even by the people closest to him. Shirley tried to guide him, balancing her role as co-star and stepmom. She wasn't smothering, but she wasn't distant either. She was, in David's own words, the mother I never really had. But that bond came with an unspoken weight, because Shirley knew David was heading down a dangerous path long before anyone else saw it. This unusual dynamic, real stepmother, TV mother, and reluctant mentor, set the stage for everything that followed. On screen, it looked like harmony. Off-screen, the relationship was far more fragile, layered with quiet fears and hidden truths. Shirley's presence in David's life became both his anchor and, in a strange way, his reminder of what he felt he never truly had growing up: stability, unconditional love, and guidance. But fame was about to twist that fragile relationship into something even more complicated. Because the moment David Cassidy's star exploded, the bond with Shirley would be tested in ways no one could have predicted. And the secrets behind his struggles were darker than anyone imagined. When David Cassidy's star took off, it wasn't a gentle rise. It was a rocket launch that left everyone, including him, dizzy. Overnight, he became the face on magazine covers, the voice that filled teenage bedrooms, the dream of millions of fans who screamed his name until their throats gave out. But behind that shiny image, the price of stardom was brutal, and Shirley Jones saw the cracks forming before anyone else dared to admit it. The producers of the Partridge Family crafted David as the clean-cut idol. His songs were sweet, his smile disarming, and his character wholesome. But off-camera, David was already living a different life. He was swarmed by fans, mobbed in airports, and forced to live under the constant gaze of cameras. Privacy disappeared. The pressure to keep up the image crushed him. He would later confess that he felt like a puppet. His real self suffocated under the perfect teen idol mask. That suffocation led him to seek escape. Alcohol, women, and eventually heavier substances became his refuge. Cassidy admitted later that the fame never gave him joy, it gave him emptiness. What should have been the dream was a gilded cage, and he was desperately rattling the bars. Shirley Jones, though proud of his success, could see his reckless side growing. She tried to offer guidance, reminding him that fame was fleeting, but David wasn't listening. He wanted to drown the noise, not quiet it. The public never saw the chaos. In interviews, David laughed, smiled, and played the part. Behind closed doors, though, he was unraveling. Rumors swirled of backstage breakdowns, of wild nights that left him barely able to perform, of managers scrambling to hide his behavior from the press. Even Shirley, who shared scenes with him every day, confessed she felt powerless as she watched the young man she cared for slip further into self-destruction. What shocked even insiders was how young David was when he began spiraling. Most stars crash later in life, but he was barely out of his teens. The very fame that made him a millionaire also robbed him of normalcy, grounding, and stability. Shirley tried to step in, not as a co-star, but as a mother figure. Still, she admitted later she couldn't break through the wall he built around himself. The saddest part? David knew he was losing himself, but he couldn't stop. He once confessed in an interview that he felt like two people: David Cassidy, the brand, and David Cassidy, the lost kid who just wanted peace. That split identity haunted him for decades, and while the world cheered his success, Shirley watched the storm gather around her stepson. She knew what was coming, but the reality of how far it would go was darker than even she could imagine. On screen, Shirley Jones was the picture-perfect mom. She smiled, she sang, she gave David Cassidy's character the comfort every teenager dreamed of. But when the cameras stopped rolling, their relationship carried a weight that was anything but scripted. Shirley wasn't just his TV mom, she was his real-life stepmother, a role David never asked for, but couldn't escape. David's biological mother, Evelyn Ward, had been absent from much of his teenage years. Their bond was strained, leaving him feeling abandoned long before fame arrived. So when Shirley stepped into his life, she filled a space that had been empty for too long. David admitted years later that Shirley was the mother I didn't really have growing up. Those words carried a mix of gratitude and longing, but also resentment, because while he admired her kindness, he still struggled with the truth that his real mother wasn't there. This complicated bond showed in subtle ways on set. Shirley often slipped into the role of a mentor, guiding him not just through lines, but through the whirlwind of fame. She gave him advice, tried to keep him grounded, and even shielded him from harsh producers when necessary. But David, young and headstrong, often pushed back. He craved independence, yet he couldn't deny he needed her. That push and pull created a tension nobody else noticed. Fans saw chemistry. What they didn't see was the battle between closeness and distance. Shirley herself revealed later that she saw David as a son, sometimes even more so than her own children. That confession shocked people, but it spoke to how deeply she felt responsible for him. The irony was cruel. David had a stepmother who loved him fiercely, but he couldn't bring himself to fully embrace it. Part of him felt undeserving, another part felt suffocated, and the rest of him just wanted to break free. But the hidden truth was darker. Shirley saw echoes of David's father, Jack Cassidy, in him. The same charm, the same brilliance, and the same demons. She feared that David would inherit not just Jack's talent, but his self-destructive tendencies. Every time she looked at him, she saw both the potential for greatness and the shadow of inevitable ruin. That duality haunted her, even as she smiled on set and played America's favorite mom. This strange, fragile bond, half love, half fear, would follow them for decades. Shirley's heart told her she had to protect David, but David's pride told him he had to prove he didn't need saving. That quiet war between them shaped everything that came after. And as David spiraled deeper into fame's dangerous grip, Shirley's worst fears began to come true in ways that would devastate them both. The public saw a smiling, carefree David Cassidy, but behind that polished image was a family history that haunted him. And Shirley Jones knew the weight of it all too well. His father, Jack Cassidy, was a brilliant actor with charm that could fill a room, but beneath the glamour was a storm of instability. Jack's erratic moods, explosive temper, and battles with depression carved deep scars into David's childhood. Shirley, as both wife to Jack and stepmother to David, was caught in the middle of chaos she could never fully control. David would later confess that his father's volatile behavior left him constantly on edge, never knowing whether he'd meet warmth or wrath at home. That instability planted seeds of insecurity and self-doubt that only grew when fame forced him under a brighter spotlight. Shirley, who lived through Jack's destructive cycles, recognized the same shadows creeping into David's life. She had married a man whose brilliance was matched by self-destruction, and now she feared his son was walking the same path. The Cassidy household was no stranger to mental health struggles. Jack's behavior wasn't just eccentric, it was manic. Friends and colleagues whispered about wild swings from charm to cruelty, episodes that could last days. For David, watching his father unravel was both terrifying and formative. It taught him early on that love could vanish in an instant, replaced by rage or indifference. Shirley, though she adored Jack at times, admitted years later that their marriage was riddled with dysfunction. That dysfunction trickled down to David in ways that shaped his future. By the time David was thrust into global fame, the damage was already baked in. His need for approval, his obsession with performing, his constant chase for validation, all of it was rooted in the desperate desire to win the love and stability his father could never give him. Shirley saw this with heartbreaking clarity. She watched David mimic Jack's charisma, but also his recklessness. She knew the patterns. She had lived them before. What makes this part of the story so chilling is how invisible it all was. In an era where mental health wasn't openly discussed, the Cassidy family's struggles stayed locked behind closed doors. To outsiders, they were glamorous Hollywood royalty. Inside, they were fractured, fragile, and hiding a darkness nobody wanted to name. Shirley tried to hold the family together, but she couldn't erase the damage already done. David carried that hidden crisis into adulthood, and no amount of fame could heal it. His addictions, his restlessness, his search for love, all of it was tied to that fractured beginning. Shirley later admitted that she felt powerless, that no matter how much she tried to be a stabilizing force, David's demons were planted long before she arrived. And as those demons grew stronger, the day came when Shirley was forced to confront the heartbreaking truth. She could love David like her own son, but she could never save him from the darkness he inherited. For years, Shirley Jones carried the image of the smiling matriarch from the Partridge family. But when the spotlight faded and time gave her space to reflect, she revealed something that shattered the illusion. Shirley confessed that, despite all her love for David, she could never truly save him from himself. It wasn't said with bitterness, it was said with heartbreak. In interviews later in life, Shirley admitted she had watched David struggle in silence far more than the public ever knew. She said she recognized the signs of self-destruction in him long before he ever admitted it to himself. But as a stepmother, she felt limited, caught between wanting to protect him and fearing she would overstep. That hesitation, she revealed, became her lifelong regret. She once said she wished she had pushed harder, spoken louder, and forced him to face his demons before they consumed him. The most haunting confession came after David's passing. Shirley revealed that she felt powerless as she watched his addictions deepen and his health deteriorate. Her words painted the picture of a woman torn between pride and sorrow. She was proud of his achievements, proud of the joy he brought millions, but devastated that the boy she called her son was quietly falling apart under the weight of fame and trauma. There were moments, Shirley admitted, where she saw glimpses of the real David, the gentle, insecure young man who wanted nothing more than love and stability. Those were the moments that cut the deepest, because she knew that behind the fame and chaos, David still longed for something simple, the security of family, the comfort of being understood, and she wished she could have given it to him more fully. What stunned fans most was Shirley's raw honesty. She didn't sugarcoat his struggles or pretend she had done everything right. She laid bare her pain, her guilt, and her sorrow that she couldn't stop the spiral. It was a confession that felt less like a celebrity's words and more like any mother who had watched a child suffer and felt helpless to intervene. Her quiet regret became the final piece of the puzzle for those who admired their bond. It explained the sorrow in her eyes during interviews, the tenderness in her stories, and the aching tone whenever she spoke about him. Shirley had loved David deeply, but love alone wasn't enough to fight the demons that haunted him. And when David's own final words came to light, they revealed just how much he had carried with him until the very end. David Cassidy's final years were nothing like the glamorous image fans remembered. The once bright star who made millions scream his name now found himself battling illness, financial collapse, and the ghosts of his past. His voice, once golden, had faded. His body, weakened by years of abuse, could no longer keep up with the man who once ran across stages chased by adoring fans. What shocked people most was how brutally fast his decline came. In 2017, David revealed something that crushed the hearts of his admirers. He had been diagnosed with dementia. To the outside world, it was another cruel twist of fate. But to those who knew his family history, it wasn't a surprise. His mother, Evelyn, had also suffered from the disease. David described it as his greatest fear come true. And yet, behind that admission, a darker truth lurked. Because even before dementia took hold, his years of drinking had already ravaged his health. In fact, rumors swirled that David had downplayed his addictions until the very end. He had claimed for years he'd beaten alcohol, that sobriety was his path. But later, in a shocking confession recorded shortly before his passing, he admitted he hadn't been sober at all. The truth was devastating. His years of heavy drinking had accelerated his downfall, and he knew it. That revelation destroyed the image of recovery he had tried so hard to present to the public. And then came his final words, words that still haunt fans and Shirley Jones alike. As his organs began to fail and his family gathered around, David's last whispered confession was, "So much wasted time." 3 simple words that cut deeper than any tabloid headline. They weren't about money, they weren't about fame, they were about regret. Regret for the relationships lost, the years squandered in addiction, the opportunities he let slip while chasing things that never brought him peace. For Shirley, those words were a knife to the heart, because she had always known that David's greatest battle wasn't with fame or even with addiction. It was with himself. He spent decades searching for meaning while running from the very things that could have given it to him: love, family, and acceptance. To hear him sum up his life with such sorrow confirmed every fear she had carried as his stepmother and friend. The tragedy of David Cassidy isn't just in his early death at 67. It's in the heartbreaking realization that even at the very end, he felt unfulfilled. Shirley's confession of regret mirrored his own. Both of them had spent a lifetime caught in the storm, wishing they could have changed the outcome. And yet, even in the shadows of his final words, one question remains. How could a bond so strong between two people still not be enough to stop the inevitable? Even after David Cassidy's passing, the echoes of his relationship with Shirley Jones linger like a haunting melody. To fans, their connection was always wrapped in nostalgia, the smiling mother and son who sang together on The Partridge Family. But underneath that perfect picture lies the real story, one of love, regret, and the crushing reality that even the strongest bonds can't always save someone from themselves. Shirley has spoken with heartbreaking honesty about her stepson. She didn't glamorize his struggles or hide his flaws. Instead, she painted him as a brilliant but broken soul who couldn't escape the weight of fame or the shadows of his own demons. Her confession that she couldn't save him strikes a universal chord, because every parent, every loved one who's watched someone they care about spiral, knows that same helplessness. David's story is more than just a tale of a fallen idol. It's a warning about the cost of fame. He was adored by millions, yet died whispering words of regret. He had wealth, beauty, talent, and opportunity, yet he left this world feeling like he had wasted too much of his life. That contradiction is what makes his legacy so powerful and so tragic. For Shirley, the legacy is deeply personal. She carries both the joy of having shared incredible memories with David and the pain of watching him slip away. Her words have become a reminder that fame doesn't guarantee happiness, that success doesn't erase trauma, and that sometimes even love has its limits. But they also remind us of something tender, that David was never truly alone. Even in his darkest days, Shirley stood by him, loving him as fiercely as any mother could. What their story teaches us is that behind every smiling face in Hollywood, there can be heartbreak hidden just out of sight. It teaches us that the people we idolize are human, fragile, flawed, and fighting battles no one else sees. And most of all, it teaches us that the time we waste is the wound that cuts the deepest. David Cassidy's life ended in tragedy, but his legacy is not just one of regret. It's also one of music, joy, and a bond with Shirley Jones that still moves people today. Fans continue to revisit his songs, his performances, and his charm. But what they can't forget are his final words and Shirley's confession that together tell a story as heartbreaking as it is unforgettable. Because in the end, the boy who sang about love and happiness left us all with one last lesson. Cherish your time, hold your loved ones close, and never take the moments that matter for granted.